Hey guys, it's Nina. Today I'm going to speak all about the solar plexus. So this is something I have done like so many videos on, but the solar plexus is very complex and can feel very overwhelming and like uncharted territories for a lot of people. So I'm going to be talking solely about a defined solar plexus experience and my own deconditioning journey within my solar plexus and learning how to express and communicate my emotions as a manifester with two full channels from the solar plexus up to the throat center. So you don't necessarily need to have these channels in order to continue and listen on, because I feel like anyone who has a solar plexus is probably a lot like me or anyone else in society who has been taught to shame their emotions or to hide them and to not know what to do with them. And that has actually been my journey that has been very rocky and very bumpy for the last few years, because most of my life I have suppressed my emotions and, love my family and love, and so appreciative of the people in my life. But we're taught at a very young age that emotions are weak or they should be punished. And that was a lot of the conditioning that was put on me at a younger age. And again, not angry with the people around me who programmed me in this way or taught me these things. I think it's actually very, very common for society and the way that we're taught. But because we have these so-called issues, or we don't have the ability to process or manage our emotions in a healthy way, it's actually our responsibility to learn how to do that. And as soon as we accept that responsibility, we can take these steps, the first steps, to really own what's coming up for us and start to untangle deconditioning and trauma and whatever else might be wrapped up in that solar plexus, and learn how to give ourselves grace and compassion and to actually feel again, like to learn how to truly feel. And there is a difference. There's a very, very big difference between having emotions and going through our emotional waves and having thoughts that create emotions and emotional waves that are actually not necessary. And that is part of the whole deconditioning journey that I have found myself in time and time again, about being aware of where the not self shows up, and that can show up in all of your other undefined centers. I have a lot of not self that comes up from my completely open heart center, my G center, my spleen, my sacral, and my root center. And that might show up as suppressing my emotions because I don't want to share them, because I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, because I don't want them to like me, or feeling fear of losing a relationship or letting go of something, or a job, because if you speak what you're feeling, like, you might lose your job, you might lose that friendship, you might lose that relationship. And so there can be a lot of like infinite amount of things that can prevent us from really communicating our truth. And when I say our truth, our emotions, because that is our authority. That is what is going to give us and show us what is correct for us or not. And for me, my own process has been learning how to trust that, learning how to trust myself, learning how to trust my body and like what is coming up for that. And I'm only 3+ years into my experiment, and I'm feel like I'm still getting to know my solar plexus and what my emotional waves really mean. And after going through kind of like a pretty big awakening where I had to face a lot of my not self all at once, it was actually pretty, I don't want to say traumatic, but it was really, really intense. So for anyone who's like, I just want to get my deconditioning done with, and like, why does it have to take 7 years, which is what Raw talks about? And it's like, trust me, you don't want to do this all in one go. Like, it will cause so much cognitive dissonance for you if all of your shit just came at you at once. And I say this because I experienced like a small piece of that, or maybe a large piece of that, and it was not fun. Like, I literally didn't eat for a month and didn't get out of bed for a week or two, and spent the following 6 months like sitting down and sitting with my shit and my not self, and all of the emotions, the suppressed emotions of my entire life all came up at once for me to look at and to slowly untangle codependency and attachments, and like where I was not standing in my truth and where I was dishonoring myself by doing things that weren't in alignment with me because of my open heart, not self, because of my sacral conditioning, because of the pressure in my root center to do things, because of my open spleen trying to hold on to things. And it was incredibly overwhelming. Like, I didn't work for most of last year. Like, it was truly like this awakening where I had to go in and look at a lot of my trauma and my conditioning and get honest with myself. And I'm sharing this with you because, you know, we say when we want to rush through this and get through this, but it is not fun when it's all thrown at you at once. So that is part of the journey of human design, especially as an emotional authority, is learning how to untangle what your conditioning is and what your not self is from like the actual emotions that are what your truth and your authority is, and learning how to trust that and going through the highs and the lows. So like I said, learning how to manage your emotions in different ways. And when I say manage your emotions, it's not like, oh, I need to control them. It's more being an observer of them and not judging them, first of all. And also just learning how to be the observer and saying what's an emotion versus what is a thought that I'm attaching myself to or that I'm obsessing or dwelling in that's actually creating emotions that are not necessary. And so these are things that you can take and really look at in your life and say, what are these old thought patterns that are coming up? So when you're feeling a strong emotion, especially as a manifester, when anger comes up or like really strong emotions come up and you're like, oh my gosh, this is uncontrollable. It's like your reaction is your responsibility and your emotions are your responsibility. And as you go through your deconditioning process, you realize like, okay, when you have such a strong emotion, it's normally rooted in some trauma or insecurity or something that needs to be looked at. And quite honestly, the Gene Keys Venus sequence was life-changing for me and helping me to be an observer and to contemplate what was coming up for me instead of getting attached to the emotions and the stories behind the emotions, and to take radical responsibility for what was coming up for me emotionally and all of the reactions. So basically the Venus sequence is looking at relationships as a reflection for you to go inward and take responsibility for what's yours and what's not yours. And it's incredibly humbling, but I recommend it to like everybody if they are seeking something like that and they really want to go in deep and they have the capacity to be able to go into something like that, because it will truly change your life when you sit with that and you sit in contemplation and you have to get very radically honest with yourself and the reactions and the emotions that you have. And so that's a very large part of the deconditioning journey that I honestly have not heard anyone else really talk about. And it's something that I have deeply experienced, and it has taken me so much time to really be able to step back and see that actual process for myself that I went through and that I'm still going through, to say like, okay, there's a large part of this deconditioning or trauma or shadow work or whatever that absolutely needs to be done in order for you to continue to get closer to your solar plexus and understand and be able to tap into your emotional authority. So with that being said, this isn't all like doom and gloom. It's actually like such a beautiful process, because for me personally, when I went through the Venus sequence and when I went through that awakening, it was like I had no other choice but to give myself compassion for everything that was coming up and to forgive myself for it and to release that judgment towards it. Because when you go into the depths of these emotions and this pain, like, you have no other choice, because otherwise you're going to be in deep self-loathing, and that's just not a sustainable place to be. And so there's a lot of inner child work that comes into that. And having a really strong support system is going to be really, really helpful, whether it's a therapist or someone who can hold space for you when you're going through all of that. Like, when you have all these emotions come up, like, you have to learn how to nurture yourself, because we're learning to reprogram ourselves from looking at emotions as like a negative thing when they're actually like the greatest gift that you could ever possibly imagine. And it's so untapped, and there's such a depth to having an emotional authority and what it really truly offers you. And people don't really understand this because they're so caught up in, oh, I'm having this emotion and it's bad. Oh, I'm having this emotion and it's good. And you're riding the highs and the lows, and it's like this never-ending roller coaster. Well, guess what? You can get off that roller coaster, because it's like, you think about an ocean, you have these big waves that are coming and going, and if you're up on the surface and you're getting caught up in the waves, you're going to be taken on a ride, and you're going to feel like you're constantly drowning. But if you can step back and be an observer of those emotions and go below the surface, and you can just observe the waves and, you know, kind of get caught up every once in a while in a wave, on a high and a low, like, you'll get to get a taste of it, but you don't have to be so attached to it. And that's where a lot of the not self comes in, because it attaches itself to the actual emotions, and then it creates a story about it, and then it's like, oh, this is who I am, and then it creates an identity. And this is where a lot of people can get stuck, which is where I was stuck for a very, very long time, and I hurt a lot of people because of it. And again, I had to give myself a lot of grace and compassion and forgiveness for that as well. So that is another thing as you go through this deconditioning journey, is sometimes you have to go through and see and observe yourself repeating old patterns and hurting people along the way in order to truly see where the not self is acting out. And it's incredibly humbling and very painful, because it can damage a lot of relationships and hurt a lot of people. But again, this is just life, and that's just how it is. And this is an opportunity for you to learn, again, how to forgive yourself and give yourself compassion, because emotions are rocky, or they can be rocky, and they can feel very intense and strong for other people. And if you're constantly caught up in your own waves, well, guess what? Everyone else around you is going to be caught up in your waves too. And so as an emotional authority, we have such a responsibility to be intentional in the way that we communicate, in the way that we express, and the way that we experience our emotions, because we are affecting every single person around us, whether you understand it or not. So like 50% of the population is emotional authority, right? So you think about the other 50% of the people who are getting caught up in your emotional waves when they're with, you know, around you, and they're experiencing those waves, and we don't know how to communicate them. We don't know how to manage them, and we're caught up in them. So these open solar plexuses are like taking all of that, and then they're getting caught up into it and amplifying it 10 times. Like, can you just imagine the chaos that's happening in this world? Because no one is able to have this emotional maturity or like wisdom about how to work with the solar plexus and the emotions that come up. Like, it's just a complete shit show. And I just laugh because I was in it, and I still get caught up in it, you know, every once in a while. And it's just life. It's just, again, that grace and compassion and forgiveness just comes in so heavily here, because we're not going to be perfect, especially as we go through our deconditioning journey and we start to become aware of what's truly going on and how we've been living. And it's something that we're human, and we're just not going to get perfectly. So anyways, along this path of going through and deconditioning the solar plexus and getting to know the emotions, it's like when you really step back and be the observer, and you start to understand, like, okay, I'm reacting to this. Okay, what is this insecurity that's, you know, happening within me? And so, for example, with some relationships, I noticed that I was being triggered by someone, and I was like, wow, this person's rejecting me, they're an asshole, they did this. And I was just constantly blaming them and pointing the finger at them. But then when I turned it back onto myself, and I was like, wow, I'm having these highs and lows, and I didn't know what to do with it, and I was blaming the other person. It's like, okay, well, what is being triggered right now? It was actually a really deep rooted insecurity of rejection. And ultimately, it was a rejection of myself, and, you know, an inability to trust myself. And that's where you get to be radically honest with yourself and take responsibility for that programming and that deconditioning, or that conditioning that lies within you, and maybe do inner child work or therapy or somatic therapy or whatever, or EFT tapping, or, you know, whatever makes the most sense for you. Or you could simply just contemplate and observe, and eventually, you know, that insecurity will fade out over time. You may still experience it in your life, but when you become aware of something and you become the observer of it, that is like basically the only thing you really need to do. If you're coming from a receptive standpoint, you don't have to do anything. It's when you become aware of something, it eventually fades out because you have the intention of, oh, this is not something I want to continue with, so you can stop it or just allow it to gradually fade out over time, because the awareness is the cure of anything. And but when it fades out, you're still going to repeat it from time to time. You're not going to be perfect because we're human and we'll do our best. So those are a couple of ways that you can really learn to look at your stuff and to take responsibility. And again, this is kind of like a cleansing process, and you're going to do it over and over and over again, because you don't just have one insecurity, you don't just have one fear, like you have so many. So we're humans, we have so many, and we've been conditioned by our environment and the people around us for so long, and we're unconscious of it. And then when we go into this deconditioning journey with human design, or just we go through our spiritual awakenings, then these things start to come up, and then we're left with no map or guidebook that says, hey, this is what's going to happen to you, and this is what you're going to feel, and this is actually a really healthy way to deal with it. Like, we're all kind of just like running around like, what the hell do I do with these emotions, and what do I do with this? And again, it just comes back to just like taking it all in and going inward. Because you can go to your therapist, and you can go to everyone else outside of you, and you can go to all your external authorities, and you can try to figure out how to fix yourself and how to deal with your emotions. But it isn't until we like are able to sit with them ourselves and love on them and release that judgment and that resistance to them, and then also be radically honest about owning all of it. Like that is the healing. That is the remedy, and that is how you really truly decondition your solar plexus, when you start to take it all in, because your emotions are your responsibility. And at the core of it, it might be a trauma or an insecurity. It could just be an old thought pattern that comes up. So I can look at someone and be like, wow, like I'm feeling really insecure about this person because I feel like they're succeeding more in life than me. And then that's just the not self comparing, my open heart comparing myself to somebody else. And then that thought creates shame and judgment on myself, which generates emotions that don't feel good. And then I can be depressed and in a low, and then I can feel sorry for myself, and I can be in this victim state. So you can see where the thoughts and the not self can actually generate these lower emotions that are not even necessary, and we're literally just becoming victims, and we're constantly beating ourselves up, and it's so unnecessary. And so it's not just the emotions that we're looking at, it's also the thoughts or the not self that is coming up that we need to become more conscious and aware of. That's going to make our lives like so much easier, because there's not going to be anyone else outside of you that's going to save you, or is going to be able to look and see what's going on in your mind that's creating these thought patterns and these emotions. It's you who has to go in and take responsibility for it and become aware of it. And it is a process, and there needs to be softness in that process, and gentleness in the way that you nurture and you become aware of these things. Because when you become aware of these things, you're like, oh shit, like I can't believe I've been treating myself so poorly, and I've been doing this to myself for so long. It's like really shocking, quite honestly. And so again, this is where the support comes in, and having a therapist to talk about these things with, or to journal. Like I journal every single morning, and I just allow all my shitty thoughts to go out on paper, and then I can see the patterns, and then I can go in my everyday life and I can catch myself and be aware of where those patterns show up and allow them to dissolve over time. So there are different ways that you can go about expressing these thoughts and these emotions, and learning how to manage them in a way that's very healthy. And so with all of this being said, that's one aspect of emotions. The other aspect is the actual authority of the solar plexus. So when, with the not self aside and the thoughts creating the emotions, we do have our natural emotional highs and lows. And it's really healthy and normal when we begin to reframe and like redefine what emotions are. So if you have anger, Like, you can look at it and be like, ooh, I feel guilty for feeling anger or whatever. No, just let yourself feel angry. Otherwise, you're just going to be perpetuating that emotion, and that resistance is going to keep you in that state of anger. Like, go do something to release it. Like, go punch something, go scream in your car, like, release that emotion in a way that's healthy for you, because like, it's not something that's negative. It's just something that's coming up that needs to be expressed, and we can transmute it into something that's creative or beautiful. And quite honestly, when I'm in my most depressed states and in my lowest of all lows, where I'm like, I don't even want to be here anymore, or I'm like, you know, experiencing the pressure from my gate 3 that doesn't have a way to release that melancholy or that depression. It's like I'm in these states where I feel very constipated, and how I can transmute that melancholic energy. It's when I write like the most beautiful poetry, and it's when I am able to create songs to play on my guitar. It's when I have like the most beautiful in-depth conversations with other people, and it's where I can actually learn to nurture and love on myself in deeper ways, and actually change those neurological pathways that aren't healthy for me when I'm in those states. And it's when I'm the most creative. It's when I go and do something different, or, you know, even when I'm trying to get rid of that depression, I get creative in the way that I try to get rid of it, by going and doing something else, or going and being around other people, or going and trying something new, or picking up a paintbrush just to like do something different and get out of my head and get out of this depressed state. Like, that depression is actually such a beautiful gift, and I'm speaking so much from, you know, having that gate 3 in my sacral, but then also my 1222 from the solar plexus up to my throat. Like, there needs to be an expression of the am I in the mood or not, like those emotional waves that come from that individual channel. It's very, very transformative. And so it's just something that I really want to share, because it's something that I have struggled so much in my journey with the solar plexus, because we're so hard on ourselves for having these highs and these lows, and there's no right or wrong. Like, we just have to allow ourselves to feel. And I'm, you know, there are still moments where I'm like, wow, like I'm in this low for a really long time, and I can get really hard on myself. But at the end of the day, it's like, we're reframing how our mind labels and defines these emotions, which is actually what is perpetuating and strengthening whatever and magnifying whatever emotion that we do actually have. So just something to be aware of and to observe within yourself and see where that lands. Maybe you don't resonate with this at all, or maybe you do a lot. This is just my experience that I'm sharing, because I struggled so much in the beginning. You know, I was getting readings from people like generators and people who do not have a solar plexus authority, and they were just like, yeah, just you have the highs and the lows, and you need to ride your emotional waves. And I'm like, what the hell does that even mean? It's like, there's so many layers to it that no one speaks about. The actual conditioning in a defined solar plexus, and the weight and like the heaviness of not being able to fully express those emotions, and then resisting it and judging, like the biggest gift that emotional person has, and that's their emotions. And I'm speaking not just about like the lower ones, but also the higher ones, because that's a whole nother thing where, you know, when we have our high emotions, we actually suppress ourselves from it. Or at least for me personally, like sometimes it's like so overwhelming, and I do things to kind of squash it, or my mind is like, ooh, this is not going to last very long, because I'm so used to hitting lows. And it's learning that it's actually safe to experience the highs and to ride the highs, knowing that it's going to end, but appreciating it for what it is in the moment. And so riding our waves and experiencing all of this is the beauty. And when we can step back and be the observer and not be attached or create storylines with the emotions, this is where we can glean our wisdom from. And this is actually part of the emotional way where we do experience our highs and our lows, because we are literally experiencing lifetimes and an infinite amount of possibilities for each scenario, and experiencing the highs and lows of everything before we can actually make a decision. So it's almost like, you know, if we didn't have our emotional wave, say you were just like, oh, I'm just gonna feel like the highs of the emotional wave. Like, there's no way that you could possibly make an informed decision about whether something is correct for you and be very clear about it unless you have experienced that low. So we have to learn how to embrace our lows and our highs as emotional beings, because they are both gifts. Like, that contrast provides us the clarity that we need in order to make decisions, and our body will tell us. Our body is constantly speaking to us. This is what human design does. It teaches us to come back to our inner authority, and it teaches us, like, what is your body saying to you? And even 3+ years into my deconditioning experience, I still struggle to listen to my body. Like, that's a whole nother video in itself. But when we learn to listen to our emotions and we learn to say, oh, I'm in a low right now, and you acknowledge it and you see it for what it is, and not attach something to it or try to get rid of it or try to escape it, you're actually going to experience it in less time. And then you're also going to glean that much more depth in order when you actually do experience the high, because you have that contrast. And so when you experience that low and you experience that high, and then you come out of it and you find that neutrality or that clarity as an emotional being, you're like, whoa, like, I just experienced lifetimes in these high and low emotions. But because I experienced both, I feel very much like strongly rooted in how I'm going to move forward with more clarity, because there's no good or bad. We say it's a high and a low, but they're just emotions, and they're just showing us, like, the potentialities of what the outcome would be for a decision, because we've experienced the high and the low of it, and then we're much more wiser because of it. And this is how we impact other people, is riding those waves as gracefully as possible, and then listening to our actual authority that's saying, hey, this is the truth, or this is, you know, how you need to move forward, and then actually listening to it and honoring it and trusting ourselves and learning to trust that clarity that comes out of that high and that low. So I think that's all that I'm going to talk about. This video is getting kind of long, and there are so many more videos that I can do on this, but I really wanted to share this because I really don't think that anyone talks about the emotional waves in this way, in the deconditioning, because it is hard as shit, guys. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, there are times where I wish that I was dead, like, because the emotions were so intense. And you may go through that, you may not go through that, but again, when we allow ourselves to feel these things, it's like, that's, like I said, that's where the gift lies. And this is where we learn how to accept parts of ourselves that we've been resisting for most of our lives. And we learn how to ride all of that. And we may go through more extreme times. And in my experience, I was getting caught up in a lot of conditioning and not self, which is why I was getting caught in these emotional loops. And I was like, oh, I'm just an emotional person. I'm just emotional. And I wasn't taking responsibility for the actual root of those emotions, which were outdated thought patterns that were not serving me, not self thought patterns, insecurities, trauma. Like, going in and looking at all of this and taking radical responsibility for your emotions, and then seeing how you affect other people. Like, this is a trip, and it is not fun or easy to look at your own shit, because when you really start to see the impact that you have on other people, you will be much more intentional in the way that you speak and the way that you express your emotions. And most people don't want to look at that, or they can't. And not that that's like wrong or bad or anything, it's just their journey, but just something to consider. Just something to consider. That's so easy, but quite honestly, it is beautiful. It's a journey as an emotional being, and we are here to impact so many people in such amazing ways and to offer so much depth and wisdom. And we might have a bit of a ride to get there because of our conditioning and you know, the environment and what we've experienced for most of our lives. But, you know, I'm here to tell you that there's light at the end of the tunnel, I promise. Not to say I still don't experience like really low lows or really high highs. It's just, there's, when you're an observer and you can sit in contemplation versus getting attached to all of it, it makes it a lot easier. And so you learn different tools in order to work with your emotions and to see them in a different light and to redefine them. And it makes things so much easier. from that perspective, especially when you give yourself a lot of grace and compassion when you are experiencing these emotions, and we don't look at them as like a negative thing. So I'm going to end that right there, and if anyone has anything to say or with their own experience with deconditioning the solar plexus, the defined solar plexus, and the emotional authority and tapping into that, I would love to hear what you were experiencing and what you're saying, and or what you have to say about it. And yeah, if you guys have any questions or anything or comments, just leave them in the comments below. If you are on your own journey and you're looking for a little bit more guidance, feel free to go to my website, nina-elise.com, and I offer readings and blueprints and coaching as well. So if you're interested in that and you're in your own journey and you need a little bit of support or guidance, I'm here if you have any interest in that. So thank you so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, because there are so many more videos coming, and I just love talking to you guys about all of this and sharing all of this. So thanks, guys. Bye.